Hello and welcome to Raider HQ After Dark. I'm your host Raider, and in this video, I'm kind of feeling under the weather, so I'm just going to do kind of a casual video that somebody had asked me to do about if please provide an explanation as to how you would prepare for, let's say, a mental health exam for both a person who has never done a mental health exam before for VA purposes and potentially for somebody who has. And so I'm going to go ahead and go through that and share my screen and we're going to talk about it. So, if you're an individual who has never filed a mental health claim before, or even if you have, um, the one thing I always suggest, like this is a tip that I suggest, is go into the 38 CFR Part 4, and I'll have that in the description, video description, the address for that. Go in and just kind of review the terms that are used for each level of disability. And the reason why I say that for the people who have never, um, filed a claim for mental health before is because if you become familiarized with what the examiner is looking for, then you can take your symptoms and translate them into the lay terminology for, these particular conditions. Like, what does flattened affect mean? Like, what does that mean? How do I demonstrate that I have flattened affect? Well, flattened affect, might not be something that you can demonstrate on command, but, your significant other can potentially fill out a buddy statement saying that, my spouse doesn't have any expression to their face. They kind of have one particular, like, they don't register emotions on their face. They're just always in this kind of locked position of their, facial muscles type thing. And by becoming more familiar with all of the different specific medical and mental health requirements, it helps you to better understand what is going to be asked of you in the examination. So, and by doing this self-report type circumstance that you're going to be doing, it helps you to, be able to kind of gauge where you think your symptoms are. But yeah, I would do it from 100% down. I would just go through and I would just, review these terms and kind of get the what it means to the lay person. And then just for the new individuals who have never filed for mental health before, the actual diagnosis that you get doesn't actually affect the percentage evaluation that you were assigned. So there's no like extra points for having schizophrenia over, say, chronic adjustment disorder. They're completely different conditions that have completely different manifestations and severities. But a person with chronic adjustment disorder could technically be more severely rated, at 70% than a person with schizophrenia at 50%. It honestly, mental health just honestly comes down to the actual symptoms that you present to the examiner at the examination. Now, another thing for individuals who have already been service connected, but may not, they're trying to do an increase, or maybe they feel like they don't have the actual percentage that they believe that they should be. Okay. I kind of hinted at this in my rant about the claim company higher level review thing, is that the examiner is going to be the one that determines whether or not all of your submitted evidence indicates that you have the symptom. Okay. So, and the difference in mental health from other conditions, like if you have a bad knee, right, that examiner can grab onto your leg and start manipulating it, and they can actually see in real time what, how disabled your body is, right? But the same is not true with mental health. Mental health, they have to go through and you've got to explain to them, provide them examples, provide them context to what these symptoms look like in your life. Because you might say that you have intermittent illogical speech patterns, but that might not actually be what you have medically or clinically, right? Because your interpretation of something is not the same as the medical provider's interpretation of something. So that's why understanding the terminology and kind of going, okay, that's what that means. All right, yeah, I do have that. So that's my first major tip just about this. If you're going to either do a new claim or do kind of an increase or a disagreement, like you're going to do a higher level review because you disagree, you need to know where what your symptoms kind of fall into. Because what you don't want to do is, let's say that you rightfully should be 50% based upon your manifestation of symptoms. You don't want to be getting ugly with, the VA or the rater or whomever, to try to square peg round hole yourself into 70% or 100%. And the reason why is because a lot of examiners, right, they have certain questions that they ask to determine whether or not you're malingering, whether or not you are making up your particular symptoms, right? And it might not be that you're trying to do that, right? It might be that you don't understand because you didn't look up what these actually mean, and you're trying to square peg round hole, like, no, I do have spatial distortions, this is what it is. But you don't really have spatial distortions, right? You might just have dizziness or something like that, like something that's better explained through another mechanism, right? So that's the first tip. Now, the second tip that I have is you should go to va.gov. You should go to www.benefits.va.gov. You can Google it and just Google VA DBQ mental health and download the mental health DBQ. Now, it's fine if you're going for PTSD. This still works because it has a lot of the same foundational things. But similar to, like, when we're talking about this, it gives the boundaries, right? Like, it talks about the DBQ, how it's going to be filled out, who can fill it out. A licensed clinical social worker, you know, um, may be under the close supervision. Now, this is outdated, right? Like, this form is outdated to where they took that away. It no longer can be a nurse practitioner or a clinical nurse specialist. None of these people. Only the psychologist and psychiatrist now can do the mental health CMPs. So just be cautious of that. I don't know why it says that. This is the most recent one, but the manual has updated to where we won't consider it. But what I would do is, this is going to be like studying for a test. Okay. For individuals who have never done a mental health examination before and you're kind of nervous about it, this will tell you kind of what the examiner is going to be doing. They're going to be determining what diagnosis you have, you know, and if you have multiple diagnoses. But the part about here that I wanted to kind of show you about is scrolling down, scrolling down. So we go down here and we start talking about occupational and social impairment. Okay. Which of the following best summarizes the veteran's level of occupational and social impairment with regard to the mental health diagnosis? The examiner can only come to this conclusion based upon the give and take that they have with you, based upon all the verbal transactions. So you have to describe what your occupational and social impairments are. Now, with the understanding that this box doesn't guarantee that you'll be granted at whatever level. If they check this box, what it does is VBMS starts out, the lowest is 100%. So VBMS starts out at 100%, but based upon the symptoms boxes that they check, you will either stay at 100% based because you have all the symptoms required to be at 100%, or if you don't, then it will slowly knock you down to 70, then to 50, then to 30, depending on what is, symptoms wise. So what you want to do is, if you want to look at this and you want to read each one of these, like these two would be 70%. So we have 100, 70, 50, 30, and 10, and 0. So whichever one that you feel like best, demonstrates what your social and occupational impairment is. If you believe that you have reduced reliability and productivity, my advice to you is, give an example of it. Come up with 3 different examples. If you need to write them down and take them with you to the examination, then do so. But provide real world examples of what your mental health diagnosis, how that impacts your social and occupational impairments, like how what that looks like. Because if you can give the examiner a mental picture of it, right? Then they can go, okay, I can get behind that. Or, you know what? I don't actually agree with that. I don't think that that's what, and you wouldn't say, like, I have occupational and social impairment of reduced reliability and productivity. How I might say it is, and I'll just give an example of mine. I suffer from agoraphobia. So it causes me to have deficiencies and impairments in most areas because my mental health prevents me from leaving, I have to work from home. Whenever I go to school, I can't attend physical school. I've got to attend online school. Family and relationships, well, it's very hard to, go to your children's soccer game if, you suffer from agoraphobia and you have trouble leaving the house. Now, judgment, I mean, I have pretty good judgment and I have pretty good thinking, but my mood is kind of bad. So I would provide those particular examples of, like, like my, you know, anxiety gets so high sometimes that it I can't work. I have to limit the jobs that I take. Being a raider is a good job because you can have a reasonable accommodation and stay home and do all those things, which is nice. But having an example, right, helps the examiner pick which one of these is true for you in the moment, right? Now, I do want to also say, this is mostly, I'm giving this for the newer claimees that are doing it. But if you are somebody who has, you're returning for maybe an increase or a disagreement based upon a rating evaluation, the evidence that you had historically that got you service connected, like your stressor statement, that no longer matters for an increase, right? Like that's what got you service connected. But the examiner is going to care about the here and now. So if you are fixated on the past, then you're going to actually undercut yourself drastically if you don't tell them what the here and now looks like. Now, the examiner could be able to extrapolate, right? That if because you're so fixated in the past, there's a little bit more going on here than normal stuff. But I'm just saying that it helps you to be in the moment. You have to tell them, like, if your example should be within the last 4 months, 6 months, right? Because that's relatively fresh. And that's what the examiner wants to do. They're literally reviewing in real time, what is your presentation right now? How disabled are you at this moment? So please just keep that in mind. So it is a good idea to have working functional examples. And if you have significant others, family, friends that can provide buddy statements that can attest to some of these areas, that is also helpful. That's very helpful in trying to get, the appropriate rating. Now, the reason, and I think I said it, I've kind of recorded this twice, but and I might not have said it. My idea is to have you print out two of these. One of these, two of them at the minimum. One of them for you to fill out, and then one of them for your significant other to fill out. Okay, so their interpretation of it. And the reason why you want to do that is because sometimes we have what is known as change blindness, to where because depression, anxiety, mental health creeps up on us. So it can be extremely challenging to keep an inventory of, like, you might not notice that you're doing things that you're doing. That's why you have your family members articulate and kind of put down examples of what's going on. So that way it kind of keeps everybody honest, right? That way you don't downplay because you don't notice that you're doing it, right? So then we would so this section is good for you and your family member or you and your friend or somebody that knows you quite well to fill out, and just kind of, provide a couple of examples that you can take with you. Now, the next section down here is going to be for the new people that have never had a mental health exam. There's going to be a lot of questioning, okay? A lot of history taking. So on the pre-military side, And what they're looking for is they're looking for any kind of, is there a better explanation for the current diagnosis? Do you have any childhood trauma that they need to kind of flesh out? They're going to focus on this, right? To try to figure it out because it's not to ding you, it's not to take away from you, but they're going for what best explains the current diagnosis. Is it the military or is it something else? So then they'll talk about the military, kind of asking you questions. All of this is normal. This is part of the normal process. So keep that in mind. Now, for individuals who are doing, increase exams or you're already rated for it, this particular background history is a little bit less important for them because they're just taking your here and now statements as to kind of what it is that's going on with you. What does that look like? And then what'll happen is you'll also have your post-military history. Now, this is also kind of I want to say a trap, but it's something to take note of because you can get caught up in what I call like casual pleasantries where you just say things that are just kind of, oh, yeah, it happens all the time. But that might not actually be true. So you have to be kind of mindful of the words you choose and how you choose them. Not to try to hide anything from the examiner, but to not make some kind of inference that you have a post-military cause of you know, your symptoms. Because it might actually not represent the truth. You might just say, like, hey, look, I ended up losing my job, or something like that. And it could be like, or hey, look, I broke up with my significant other, which doesn't necessarily equate to why you have your current diagnosis. So if it's not relevant to the current situation or circumstance, there's no, I mean, obviously you do whatever you want to do, but for me personally, I don't say anything that's going to, I give them a full picture, but I don't say anything or put emphasis into stuff that isn't truly the full reason why I believe that I have depression and or anxiety. So they'll go ahead and fill this out, and it's kind of extensive. Now, if you want to know, this is where sometimes the raters kind of identify certain inconsistencies with the DBQs. If you provide history, pre-military and post-history, and that history doesn't match up with the check boxes below for the symptoms, that's where the rater's going to go, whoa, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Like the veteran's unable to communicate, but he's a teacher, but he doesn't have any problems at his job. And I've said that a couple times in a different video, but it is something that you should take to heart is that making a casual comment in your history won't necessarily hurt your transaction between you and the examiner, but it could cause issues later on with the rater. So make sure, and this is part of the reason why I suggest that you print this out and you kind of go over it and you prepare for the test that you're taking. If because it's hard for a lot of us that have mental health to do instant recall of information. Sometimes we have to jog our memory, right? So you might need to do that. And this is a good kind of trial run that you and your spouse can do, or you and your significant other can do. And you can actually, prepare for this. So that way you are less likely to say something that's harmless to you, but could be harmful to your claim. Now, moving down here, we then come to one of the more important sections, the symptom section. And I've already went through this in the mental health video, and I'll go through it again, but you want to fill these out and you want to provide examples. So if you say that you have depressed mood, what does that look like? Right? You've got to paint a mental picture for the examiner. You can't just say, I'm depressed. It's not going to get you anywhere. Like, yeah, they might check the box. They might not check the box because they might go, okay, well, if you were really depressed, evidenced by what? So I try to find, m- more examples. Now, if we go back here to the mental health, the higher the symptoms are, I wouldn't focus so much on, showing symptoms of mild or transient symptoms or, like whatever here. I would, if you're trying, like if the 70% seems right to you, then I would focus on, the symptoms in the highest category that you think that you feel like you're going with and give examples for these. Okay. But you and a family member, or you and a friend, or you and somebody should fill these out in reference to you. And you should just go through and just say, okay, what does this look like? And this will help you because a lot of examiners just go down the checklist. Do you have suspiciousness? Okay, what does that look like? So, and give them what it looks like, like I have suspiciousness. You know, I, I have compulsions that before I go to bed, I've got to check every window and door. I got to walk the perimeter of my house. I got to do, I got to do these, and that kind of does two things: the suspiciousness, and then the ritualistic behavior, obsessive rituals, like you know, whatever it looks like to you, because you might not know that you're doing these things. You might call them something else, but also look up what these words mean. Now, not every single symptom on here is going to be something that every single person, every single veteran, I should say, has access to, right? Some of these are personality disorders. Some of these symptoms are very rare in non personality disorder diagnoses. And if that was the case, then you would have to bring some medical records to support why you have the symptom that you have. Now, uh, I think so that's about it for this. We do have behavioral observations. This is going to be where the examiner kind of reports how your body language is. Are you anxious looking? It helps the rater to review here to kind of contrast these things. If you say that you are like near constant panic all the time, but you are calm as a cucumber in the examination, that's an incongruency that we would want to kind of go, okay, is that just a one-time thing? Was he hopped up on drug? Like what happened? How is this different than that? Why these two things, like, is this the norm? Which is the normal? I guess is probably the better way to put it. Which one is the exception and which one is the rule for the veteran? And then we come down here. Does the veteran have other symptoms? So we do look at this too. Um, and then competency. Okay, now this scares a lot of veterans. Okay, competency is something that is only assessed at the 100%. If you got a natural 100 and you were granted 100%, then competency comes into play. The default setting for competency is you are competent until proven otherwise. And even then, it has to go to a different, you can't just, you have to have kind of like a hearing for it type thing. We used to be able to just say, yes, we're getting him a fiduciary because we feel like it, type thing. Not anymore. They've changed that relatively recently to where you have to go through a different evidentiary review for competency. But just keep in mind that one of the things that can kind of spark a competency review is there is a question that is, does the veteran manage their own finances? If the answer is yes or no on here, is falling under the competency section. Now, I'm not going to say anything more than that, other than this question is sitting under the competency section. So if um, you need to answer this one truthfully, but you also need to know that this question has potential consequences. Okay. We're going to say it again, potential consequences. And then we talk about the remarks section right here. So this is where the examiner can put in additional, discussions. Now, what I wanted to also go over here, they don't have it. I wanted to just hijack this particular video and talk about the fact that if the rater didn't infer IU, that is not a violation of any rule or regulation. If the examiner reported here that the symptoms of PTSD and interfere with the veteran's ability to work, that is not a that is not grounds for the rater to actually infer IU. We will not do that. We should not do that because there's criteria for IU that is independent of whether or not the examiner says that the condition causes impairment of the actual ability to work. Okay, you have to, number one, be unemployed or not gainfully employed. You have to, meet the scheduler criteria. You have to also, in addition to the scheduler criteria, you have to have a formal economic impact assessment. And that is not the same as when they put in remarks that, like, hey, he has trouble working, or hey, he's not this or that. So please don't misunderstand those two things, because you guys have been sending me emails about your higher level reviews since that video came out. And that's been kind of a general theme in a couple of them, I should say, that, the person that wrote it is just hammering the fact that the rater should have raised it to issue. Well, we can't raise something to issue to deny it. So if we don't know if you meet criteria, we're not going to raise it to issue, and we can't raise it to issue, even if the examiner said it, right? I mean, because the examiner saying it doesn't on its face qualify as you being unemployed, and it doesn't qualify as an economic impact assessment either. So, and we can't grant without an 8940 form. So, I don't know. It's one of those things. Now, the other thing I want to say is if you're new filing, for mental health, a lot of people don't get their mental health from the VA itself. They get it from outside. So whenever I've been talking about the 4142, 4142 alpha forms, this is what it is. So this is a release of information form. And it basically just talks about like, hey, look, you give consent for the VA to pull records from a private provider. So in order to get those records pulled from a non-VA provider, and that includes was it clinical care or whatever it is, private care. Can't even remember the terms. Like I said, I'm sick, guys. So, and then you have the 4142 alpha, which is the actual, like, this is the release of information form. This is the form that tells the VA who they can get the records from, dates and times. If you don't fill this out correctly, like if you misrepresent letters or you get the address wrong, the VA will not pull the records in question. Now, if you're newly filing a mental health claim, this could be important for you because if the provider in question is the one that gave you the diagnosis, if you don't have that diagnosis, then you don't get an exam and you don't get, evaluated. So it's important that if you need to get private records submitted, that this has to be dress right dress. It cannot be off in any way, shape, or form. You do not get a second chance to get these records. And what I mean by that is the VA will not notify you that they were unable to get these records. They don't generally send out a letter saying that we couldn't get them. You might see it on your rating narrative in the evidence section that we were unable to get these records, but that'll be about the only notification as to whether or not we did or did not use them. Okay. Or at least acquire them. And then moving on. Okay. So one of the other tips that I wanted to talk about is if you are receiving your care at the VA, one of the things that I recommend every single time is if you have a good rapport with your VA provider and they've put in a lot of good things in your VA treatment records, is to actually, when you file your claim, to request preference to have your exam done at the VA in question, right? That you receive your treatment from. And the reason why is because we want to try to capitalize on good bias. So even though the CMP examiners don't see patients, they go to lunch with the doctors, that do. So they know who your doctor is. The CMP examiners at the VA facility, right? They know who your doctor is. You get more credibility with the VA CMP examiners if you are seen at the VA. I hate to say it's true, but it is, right? Would you trust somebody that you potentially work with? I mean, yeah, you potentially would because you feel like they, are doing the right thing. Now, there are exceptions to that, obviously, but more often than not, you will have positive bias about, if the VA examiner is done, if the examination is done at the VA facility that you seek care from. Now, how do you go about doing this, you might ask? Well, with your claim, you would just submit a VA Form 21 4138 form, a statement in support of the claim, and you would say, hey, look, I request to have my VA exams performed at, so in Salisbury VA, VA Medical Center, if possible. And yeah, so that's kind of what I would do for that. Uh, it's not a guarantee in any way, shape, or form of any kind of particular outcome. But what it does do is it potentially helps in two different ways. So the first way is, like I said, there's that positive potential bias. The second way is VA examiners have full access to your VA medical records. So if you get a lazy VSR who forgets to add your Capri or your VA medical records to the exam request to a vendor, then what happens is that vendor can only see what we give them permission to. So if we don't give them permission because the VSR forgot to do it, those VA records that prove or something, that evidence won't get before the examiner. In contrast, VA examiners have full access over your VA records, especially the records at your home station that you receive your care from. So it kind of cuts down on the VA's ability, or well, the claims processor's ability to kind of negatively influence your claim by not including all the evidence. Okay. Now, the third thing, I don't even know if we're on numbers yet, but the next thing I would talk about as a tip that after going here is I would get a copy. Going back to this, I would get a copy of your private treatment records if you had them, and this goes for both the increased claim individuals and the new claim individuals. I would take a copy of your records with you um, to your examination. And oftentimes the examiner won't want to see them, but sometimes they do. Like I have had it to where the veteran has reported that the examiner said that they didn't get anything. And then I go look at the examination and come to find out the VSR included no records, like nothing. It was just please do increase. And the veteran had, provided a lot of evidence to support them being a lot higher than what they were, and it was just sad. So I had to delay the claim to do the right thing, turn it around, get a new exam, and include all those records. But it did delay the claim. So in my mind, if it was my claim, and I like to talk about if it was my claim, I would do this just to, double check. Yeah, I like to do more so nobody can say I did less. I don't know. It's kind of a weird saying, but it's kind of my motto. But yeah, so I do that. Now, let's say that you, as a new person, claiming mental health, or if you're an established person claiming mental health, and you have, you're going to an examination, and let's say you miss it. Let's say for whatever reason, car breaks down, whatever. You need to provide good cause to the VA. The VA, you need to call in the VA. You need to submit a document to the VA. I would do both because I don't trust the call center sometimes. And I would just submit something in writing, like on a VA form 21 4138, saying, hey, look, I missed the examination because my car broke down, right? If you don't provide good cause, you'll get denied. And if you get denied, then appealing makes the process twice as hard because then you have to get new evidence to prove or disprove something. I mean, they'll typically give you an examination, but you still technically have to have new evidence in order for them to open up a supplemental claim. But you have to do this like immediately. Like I suggest the same day it happens. Like if you miss the exam, call in and submit a document, upload a document to your claim file, and just say, "Hey, look, I missed it. This is my good cause. Child care issues, whatever. We will accept almost any reason if you give us the opportunity to. But this is one of the things that most veterans, and by most I mean almost all, fail to do. So, I mean, I've had instances when um they didn't attend the exam. So we have to use sometimes we have to completely just deny the claim, but other times, like for increase exams, we can use the evidence of record, but we didn't get all the evidence of record because they didn't, do the 4142 alpha and give it to us. They kind of just submitted a couple things, and wow, with the plane overhead. But anyway, so this is another tip for those that are filing for mental health, because I know that the process can be daunting, right? And it takes it takes so much energy just to get up the courage to go to the examinations, even for seasoned veterans who are going for increases. It can just be nerve wracking. I get it, but you have to be on top of this good cause if you miss the examination. Now, I want to spend a brief amount of time. I want to see what was this last one. Um, I wanted to talk about the authenticity, like for other veterans who are going for increases that are using private DBQs. Now, I have done videos on, like how to strengthen your private DBQ, but for mental health, especially, you need to be going through, if you're using a private DBQ, you need to be submitting a VA Form 21 4138 with your claim submission and providing the reason, rationale why you are going with the examiner that you're going with. You need to explain to the rater and to the VSR that this is not fraud. I'm just exercising my personal choice to use the private option. I have given the examiner this particular evidence. They have seen all of my evidence under here. And also you should submit the evidence with your actual claim. If there's any kind of evidence that the VA doesn't have that examiner saw, you better be submitting it with the claim submission. Because if the VA can't see it, then it doesn't exist, right? And then the findings of the private DBQ completer, they won't be get seen as authentic because they're referencing things that the VA can't see. So just keep that in mind. I mean, private DBQs are possible, right? I know that the VA's burning them like it's a fire sale, but just be upfront, be honest. What really, like, if you want to know the one vulnerability to a private DBQ is, and I'll just share it with you. Anytime, like, what disqualifies something for me is if I come up here and I see chronic adjustment disorder, which is the least severe mental health condition you can have. It does, and chronic adjustment disorder is the disability you assign when you don't meet criteria for these higher level mental health conditions. So when you have a circumstance in which a person has chronic adjustment disorder, and then you come down here, right? And the person, and I've seen this more times than I can count. This is what their DBQ looks like. Okay. Let's just keep going here. We're going to keep going. Actually, no. Okay. Okay, yeah, that one. Okay, so this is I have seen this more times than I can count. The only one that is not checked is the persistent danger of hurting self or others, because whatever the circumstances are, and I'm not going to speculate on this. This is the step too far. But they have chronic adjustment disorder, which means that anytime I see this, right? So if you're reviewing your private DBQs for mental health and it looks like this, you better have something wild for your diagnosis. Because if you only have chronic adjustment disorder, then the examiner, based upon these symptoms, underdiagnosed you. And that is an insufficiency. And we will actually, because you could be diagnosed with something more severe, clearly. So just keep that in mind. Or insomnia. I mean, like, you wouldn't believe how many times I've seen this right here from insomnia. And I'm not belittling people with insomnia. I know it's a debilitating disorder, right? But you're going to have to explain to me how it causes hallucinations, delusions, how it makes you like nobody there's just no way on I mean it raises questions to me. I'll just put it that way. Like I can't reconcile this if you have insomnia and all of these are checked. So please just keep that in mind. When you do submit a private DBQ, submit it so that way read it over, make sure it matches. Oh gosh, we're at 40 minutes and I'm just kind of casually talking with you guys. So anyway, so I'd like to take the time right now to thank all the people who have subscribed, left comments, liking, all the members, all the raiders and the VSRs who are supporting the channel. I appreciate you more than you know. All the super comments, super chats. I plan on doing a live stream this Saturday. I hope to feel better by this Saturday. And then I did also want to kind of address one last thing, and that is for the people in the comments section. You know, I love you guys to death. But if you've been doing the same thing over and over and over and you are not getting anywhere in the process, what is the definition of insanity, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, doing and expecting a different outcome. Now, I come and tell you how, rating is done. And if you want to disagree with me, that's fine. I welcome it. I welcome your disagreement. I welcome you having a difference of opinion from me. But from my perspective, right? If you're the one that gets so mad because we're doing it wrong and you're not getting the rating that you want time and time and time again, it might be a good idea to maybe look at a different approach just for your own psychological well being. And that's about all I got to say on that. And I'm not digging at anyone specifically. It just, it hurts me a little bit that there's just this really weird, you guys have been conditioned to the fact of this is the way things are. This like weird codependence thing where, you've got to listen to me and I'm going to give you the top 5 things. And, and it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen because I'm like that. None of that's how this works, and I don't understand it. And I mean, I'm not saying I don't understand it from your guys' perspective. I don't understand it from like it actually makes me a little sad that, people take advantage of other people and they tell them the wrong thing to keep them dependent on them because the other person has a clear motivation to do so. I don't have that motivation. I'm just telling, and I show my manual references and I show everything else, but I just wanted to take the time to just do a little PSA here. Like you don't have to believe me, but don't believe them. Okay. Like don't believe the snake oil salespeople, the claims, that the claims company that gives you the legalese, the thing. I mean, some claims companies are good, some VSOs are good. Some accredited claims agents, some attorneys are great, you know, but not everybody is. So, and I'll be honest with you, the VA keeps the process so hidden that if somebody claims that they do know the process pretty well, they have to know somebody on the inside or have worked there themselves because the VA keeps this all cloak and dagger hidden, like the PACT Act SOP. Go find that if you can. Good luck. I got a copy of it, that I've downloaded, an older copy that I'd like to show you guys, and I'm just wondering how canceled I would be if I did so. But it's like a 56-page document of super secret squirrel stuff that you guys will never see that controls how your claims are processed that's hidden from you. So, I mean, I'm just asking for a little bit of, lack of rigidity. Don't be rigid with this. Open your mind to the possibility that there are other ways that these things could be interpreted. Okay. And that's about all I got for you today. Raider out.